within the class, we can represent data using static variables, non-static variables. Within the class, we can represent data using static and non-static. So first, let me make you understand the difference between static and non-static, right? Observe. You can just make a note of this. Important. If you're not understanding static and non-static, you won't understand anything in object-oriented programming. Means for the next 2 weeks.
2 weeks ఏదో చెప్తావా?
Fine. For example, class EMP, class EMP, employee, class employee I'm taking, right? Colon, class, any name you can use, right? Employee, for example, employee ID equal to input, enter the employee ID, enter EID, right? You'll enter. Next, employee name, input, enter ename, enter ename. Salary, input, enter the salary. Company, right? Input, enter the company. So this is the class, right? Class is a collection of variables, and also you can have methods. Okay, like DEF, calculating tax, DEF, calculating net salary, right? So this is what data, variables, data and methods. So within the class, don't say they are within the class, you should say them as methods. Functions also in the same DEF keyword you use, right? Everyone, we use DEF keyword for defining functions. Methods, the main, how can you say whether it's a function or a method? Means functions will be outside the class, methods will be within the class. Simple different. I will be providing you multiple differences between function and method. Means the main difference is outside the class, if anything, function. Within the class, method. If anybody asks you what is the difference between function and method, methods always be within the class. Methods, functions outside. Now, if this is the class, right? Class EMP. Whenever you create a class, right, compulsory we need to have objects. How to create object in Python? Means object name, E1 is the object name of which class? EMP class. In this way I need to. E2 is an object of which class? EMP class. E3 is the object of which class? EMP class, right? This is class. This is what? Objects. Class, objects. Within the class, we have what? Data means variables. Methods. Understood here? Defining a class, creation of objects. Now, static variable, this is non-static variable. Observe carefully when to go for static and non-static. If data is common for all the objects. If data is common for all the objects, go for static variable. If data is changing, if data is changing, from object to object, if data is changing from object to object, if data is common for all the objects, if data is changing from object to, now try to say how to define that. If data is common for all the objects, go for static. What is that? If data is common for all the employee objects, go for static. If data is changing from object to object, go for non-static. First, observe this EID is there, right? Now try to answer everyone. EID, should I represent using static variable or non-static variable? Static or non-static?
Non-static.
Before you answer, employee ID for E1, E2, E3, for employee 1, employee 2, employee 3, is it common for all that employees? Employee IDs? Different, right? Means if data is changing or not from object to object. If data is changing from object to object means non-static or static. So employee ID, how? Non-static variable. How to define a non-static variable? Later I'll discuss. But when to when to go for non-static, when to go for static. First you observe. Employee name, static or non-static? Everyone, static or non? Employee name means for employee 1, employee 2, employee 3. The data is changing or not? If it is common, go for static. So non-static variable. Salary remains same for all the objects, or their salary changes from so static or non-static? Assume that E1, E2, E3 employees are there, right? They all belong to the same company, IBM. They all belong to the same company, IBM. Next is company is there. Company. Data for E1, E2, E3 objects, company, is it changing or same? If same means static variable, right? Company address. Will it remain same for all that? Static or non-static? Now you have understood what is static, non-static, when to go for static, when to go for non-static. If data is same for all the objects. For example, if I take customer data, now try to answer everyone. If I take customer data, customer ID, static, non-static?
Non-static.
Everyone who are in the online also try to give response. Customer name,
Non-static, sorry. Sir.
Non-static.
customer name, non-static. If all the, for example, 10 customers, C1, C2, C3, 10 customers are there. They all got account in SBI. So, for example, account number means non-static. Bank name,
Static.
static variable, right?
Yes.
For example, withdraw limit per day.
Static.
Will it,
Non-static.
will it be same for all the customers or will be changing?
Changing.
Same, right? Per day,
Same
how
for
much
all
you
customers.
withdraw in that ATM? Same, right? For all that customers. Withdraw limit per day is set for all the customers, some
Yeah, it's static.
static variable, right? So bank name same, but withdraw limit also same for all the customers. Means how much you need to withdraw per day will be same for all the customers. So static variable. Customer ID, non-static.
Non-static.
Customer name, non-static. Balance,
Non-static.
non-static. For example, initial balance.
Static.
For example, okay, for opening the account, right? They'll 5,000 or some
Limited.
amount. Okay, forget about it. And understood, right? Static and non-static.
Yes, yes.
If data common for all the objects, static. If changing, non-static.
Non-static.
Once again, today my discussion will be only on static variables. Understand the static variables with multiple examples. I'll be discussing properties, but first take this, whatever you have understood in this, write in your own words. Hmm. Uh, Static variable and non-static variable. So that is class, the variables and methods we have got within the class, objects creations right here. First observe, take this class first, everyone, just you'll understand what a class consists of. Class will be like similar to structures in C language. Struct student will take like, but there only variables will have within the structure. You won't have any functions or methods within that, right? Here methods included. That's why we won't see any concept of structures in Python or in Java. Objects E1, E2, E3. Fast, right? Fast. Now see this static and non-static variables. Static and non-static. If data is common for all the objects, if data is changing from object to object. Here employee ID non-static variable changes from object to object. Employee ID changes from object to object. Employee name is there, right? That also changes from object to object. Salary also changes, but company is common. That's why static, because if all employees belongs to IBM, but if the employees belong to different companies, again it should take as non-static. Observe this df tax. Df tax is there right here. It's a method, right? Tax is a method. Okay, observe here. Static variable, non-static variable, where you will be defining it? Within the class. But one more difference you observe here, everyone, between static and non-static. Static variable will be within the class, non-static will be the, always non-static variables should be within the methods. Non-static variable should be within the methods, means within the tags or within the net salary only. Non-static variables. Static variables can be outside it. Static variables will be within the class, means here a equal to 10. What? It's a static. A equal to 10 if I'm defining here static variable, because it's, but non-static always they should be within the methods. Non-static variables always within the methods, within the class and also within the methods. Static variable should not be within the methods. Understand the difference? Static variables should not be within the methods. Non-static should be within the methods. One more difference, right? We'll discuss one by one difference. Where the method should be? Where the method should be within the class. Where non-static variable should be? Within the methods. With the class, method should be there. Within the methods, non-static variable should be present. Static variables within the class, outside the methods. Okay. How many times you are going to assign a non-static variable? Employee ID is a non-static variable, right? How many times you are going to assign the value for it? If there are 5 employees are there at E1, E2, E3, E4, E5. Everyone try to answer. E1, E2, E3, E4, E5. 5 employees are there. How many times you are going to assign value for EID? 5 times. E1 dot EID equal to 101 is ID. E2 dot EID equal to 102. E3 dot EID, E4 dot EID, E5 dot EID. 5 times. Employee name, how many times? Salary? 5. Company? Company is a static variable. Company is a static variable, right? Only how many times? 1 time. You won't say like employee 1 dot, employee 2 dot, company employee. Just say company equal to IBM. Company equal to IBM. Means all the employees belonging to the IBM. So what is the difference? One more difference what you observe here? Non-static variables, if you have got n objects, n times you need to initialize, n times memory should be allocated. N times memory should be allocated for non-static. For static, only once memory allocation. For static variable, only once memory allocation. Understood this point? Okay. Now observe this. Static, make the page into 2, static variable and non-static variable. Static variable and non-static variable. First thing, what is the first difference? First difference is if
Data is common for all the objects.
data is common
All
for
the
all the objects.
data is common for all the objects. If data is common for all the objects, go for static variable. Go over. But here, if data is changing from object to object,
Changing from
if data is changing from object to object, go for non-static. Understood this point, everyone? Second difference. Compulsory if you go for
Static variable should be in the class.
static variable within the class, outside the method. Static variable should be defined. Static variable defined within the class and outside the method. Non-static variable defined
Within the class and method.
within the class
And method.
and within the method. Yes. So before that point, right, one more point. Non-static variables are defined. Non-static variables are defined by using self. By using self. Example. Non-static variables are defined by using self. Static variables outside the methods. Non-static variables are defined by using self. For example, self dot x equal to 10. Self dot y equal to 20 in this way. The non-static variables always you should have self. Now you should not say x equal to 10. Self dot x, self dot y. Observe one example I'll give here. One example, right? Class sample, okay? X equal to 10 def display self dot y equal to 20 dot self dot y equal to 20. What is this? Static variable. What is this? Non-static variable. What is this? Method. Understood. Static variable. See this outside the method. A non-static variable within the method. Within the method. Outside the method. Understood now the defining, right? First, you have understood the difference between static and non. When to go for static, when to go for non-static. Everyone, respond. Where to define, you have understood. Where to define static, where to define non-static. Right? X equal to, where to define static? Outside the method, within the class. Non-static, where to define? Within the class, within the method. And when to go for static, when to go for non-static, you understood, right? Now, the fourth difference, try to say now. And first you write up to these 3 points, finish writing. What is the next point? Only static variable, how many times it is initialized or memory allocated? Only one time.
One time.
For non-static variables, how many times they are
Enough.
n times? If n objects, n times. So here static variable only once it is initialized. Only once it is initialized, only once memory allocated. Okay. If n objects, then non-static variable is initialized for n times. Initialized for n times. If n objects, then non-static variable initialized for n times. That is n times memory is allocated. N times memory is allocated. Okay. N times, if n objects, the non-static variable is initialized for n times memory is allocated. Next, accessing static variable. Accessing static variable. Within the class using class name. From within the class using class name, from outside the class also using class name only. Always non-static, always static variable should be accessed by using class name. Example, print sample.x. This static variable, this is class name. See, from within the class, how can you access a static variable using class name? From outside the class also class name. Understood? What is this accessing? Means if I want to print the static variable value within the class, what is that? Class name. Class name is what? Sample dot x. From outside the class, if I want to print that static variable value, class name dot x only. Sample dot x only. For accessing non-static variables. From within the class using self. From outside the class. From within the class using from outside the class using the object name. From outside the class using object name. From within the class using self. Example. Print self dot y. This is within the class. Self dot y within the class, e1 dot y from outside the class. E1 means what? Using object name. From within the class using self. If you want to print a non-static variable within the class, use self. Outside the class means use object name. So these things you need to understand. Yes, x equal to 10 means static variable. X equal to 10 is means within the method you are talking. X equal to non-static self dot x equal to 10. So if okay, self dot x equal to 20. So if you want to print both static and non-static within the class, for static say print class name sample dot x. For non-static self dot x within the class. From outside the class static sample dot x only. For non-static e1 dot x. Understood? Now coming back to our discussion, right? Okay, now keep the heading like static variables. From within the class, we can represent data using static and non. Now I'll be discussing on static variables only. Okay, today my total, okay, and tomorrow also my discussion will be on static. Next, if you, after understanding the static, we go for non-static, right? The static variables, the variables which are defined within the class and defined outside. First observe this, understand, and later you can make a note, right? So the variables, yes, which are defined within the class and defined outside, all the methods are known as static. For example, class sample x equal to 10, m1 method. So x equal to 10 is a static variable defined within the class outside the method. And here if I want to print, right, sample dot x class name within the class, if you want to print sample dot x from outside, this is the end of the class. From outside the class, sample only. Take this. Fine. Take the properties of the static variable also. That the other example, this statements also, which is common for all the objects. One second, I'll do it. And first, Fine. Properties of static variable. If data is common for all the objects, then it is recommended to represent using static variables. For example, if all that bank name is SBI, all the customers have got account in SBI, withdrawal limit 25,000 per day. Data which is changing from one object to another object, then go for non-static, like employee name, ID, designation, salary, right? For static variable, only once memory is allocated. For static variable, only once memory is allocated, as it is initialized only once. You are written right. Take the second point. Third one, a static variable can be accessed by all the methods of that class and also by the other classes. For example, salary. For example, company you have given like static variable, right? That company can be accessed by all the methods of that class, and if you have got any other class also, that also can access it. A static variable can be accessed by all the methods of that class and also by the other classes. Take this, let's write these three examples. A static variable accessed by all the methods of that class and also by the other classes. Class sample x equal to 10 is a static, displays a method, print x here. Display method, okay. Here you say sample.x, sample.x, sample.y, sample.x, sample.x, sample.x. Okay, x equal to 10 is a static variable. Display method can access it, show method can access it, any other methods also there, they can access the static variable. Fine. So static variable can be accessed by all the methods of that and also by the other classes. Static variable always be accessed. See, always be accessed by using class name from within the class. From within the class or from outside the class. From outside the class or from within the class, class name only. One second. Right. Okay. Control S. Yes. A static variable always be accessed by using class name from within the class or from outside the class. So class sample x equal to 10, 20 are static variables. So display sample.x, sample.y, show sample.x, sample.y. From outside the class also sample.x, sample.y, right? Accessing static variables from outside the class using class name. From within the class also class name, right? This example. From within the class, they are accessed by using class name. From outside the class also class name. The static variables can be accessed within the class. Up to here it's class. This is the end of the class. Indentation is broken, right? Then from outside the class. Class name dot is finished. Right up to here fast. Okay. If you are defining static variable, can be accessed by the method display method, show method. So using class name from outside the class also using class name, right? Okay. Okay. So these are the properties of static variables. Properties of static. Okay. How defining class, defining a class, so defining a method, defining a static variable, everyone have understood, right? Defining class, defining method, defining static, defining non-static, difference between static and non-static, you understood, right? Fine. Difference between function and method. Functions always be defined outside the class, method will be within the class. A method is called always by using a object. Method always called by using a object like s1 dot display. Function called normally without any object. How it, we have seen functions, right? There is a function called show. How will you call it? Show only. If there is a function display, you will call display only. But here method s1 dot display. If you have got a method called tax, employee one dot tax or employee two dot tax, we need to say employee one tax method, employee two tax means object is required. A method is always called by using a object. For my function, no need of any object. Method should always have self as a parameter, but for function, it's not required. Take this differences between. I'll show you practically in the tomorrow session. Difference between function and method. Function always outside the class, method within the class. Method is called always by using object like s1 dot display. Function called normally without any object. Okay. Okay, finish writing this. Function and a method, both are different. Functions and methods are not same.